Sitting is resumed.
Order number 4, in the name of the Honourable Minister of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, to move the second reading of the Barbados Identity Management Bill 2021.
Senator McConney.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, Mr. President, this Barbados Identity Management Bill comes to this chamber at a time when we as citizens and as workers and as students and as a society, we are still shifting and adjusting in our current circumstances to what many are calling the new normal. It is coming at a time too, sir, when we as a country have to be more forward-looking than this current circumstance and be looking at the next normal. And the next normal, sir, is the entree into the digital environment where we have already started, but it will be a continuing journey towards our digital transformation. Right now, sir, we are focusing on making sure that our people are able to survive now. But we also have to govern for the future. And sir, it is against that backdrop that this bill, and with that intention of looking towards the future, that this identity management bill is being brought into this honourable chamber. More and more people, sir, as you are aware, are moving online. And more businesses and governments are offering services online. Sir, if we want to understand what is happening globally, because Barbados does not exist in a world on its own, we will see that when it comes to persons, internet users who are actually using the internet to access goods and services, be it from government or private sector or others, we recognize that just 5 years ago, that was just over 58%. We recognize now, sir, that it is projected that by the end of this very year, that will be 65% of people using the internet who will be using it to access products and services. We are growing, sir. And that is just the e-commerce side of it. If we look also, sir, at the online documentation processes, you would have heard in the previous debate, Senator Boyce talk about people putting the workflows that deal with getting the paperwork done for various payments and other things, that those types of workflows and services and processes are now going online. And sir, if we also look at what is happening with regards to online, putting online, digitalizing and digitizing the processes associated with paperwork, sir, we will see, sir, that, for example, in the area of e-signatures, where people, instead of using a pen and paper to sign a document, they're now using electronic signatures from any distance, where they can sign a document electronically. Sir, that ballooned from 89 million to 754 million in just 5 years. Sir, this entire world of moving online, whether it's for e-commerce, whether it is to put your workflows, your processes to get more efficient and to be able to save onboard customers more easily and be able to save money, this entire world of digital is growing at an exponential rate. And so while Barbados might not be at the cutting edge at this particular point in time, we definitely have to be pushing to accelerate our journey, because it is not just the businesses and the governments who are actually pushing for this. We are recognizing that the appetite of consumers and of the general public is such that they're demanding that we find new ways of doing business with them, with giving them information, with engaging with them, with allowing them to make payments, and equally to allow them to be able to receive services from any distance. As such, sir, This bill is seeking to help us to stand on firmer footing as a country from a legislative perspective as we face the digital world, which I consider to be the next normal. This bill, sir, if passed, it will be able to provide opportunities for Barbadians to participate more fully in this digital world that I have started to describe, which is facilitated by internet and emerging technologies. So, sir, why an identity management system? Let's think about identity as we experience it here in Barbados. An individual has many documents, sir, that contain identity information. You have your driver's license, you have your birth certificate, you have your passport, you have your Barbados ID, you have your NIS ID. You have all of these different documents, sir, that contain identity information. This information is in various states of accuracy, I will say. You may have come-ins on her driver's license as CUMMINGS, but then you have come-ins on her birth certificate was really CUMMINS. You may very well have all kinds of inaccuracies in different places where the birthday is 7/8 one place and then 8/7 the next place, simply because of errors of various causes. The intention of this identity management system, Mr. President, is to bring consistency and trust to the information that is used to identify people, and to provide a single reference, a trusted reference of one version of the truth of who an individual is, of their identity. What this means is that we are putting in place a system that, when it is finally built out, will ensure that the situation many of us face now, where we will go from one government office to another, or to another service provider to another, and we have to provide the same paperwork over and over and over again. When this is entirely built out, and the systems that will all connect to it are made interoperable, meaning able to talk to each other in a way that makes sense and that's safe and secure, we will then not be in a position where you will provide your information only once and be able to access services from various resources in that particular way. I will not get into it right now because it's not directly related to the bill, but certainly it supports what we are seeking to do with the national ID in terms of making services accessible to people and allowing people to perform many different transactions using the digital ID, where we are in the process right now of putting together what we call an e-services platform. And what that is, in simple terms, it is basically a single safe platform across which you exchange information. So that if you are one government ministry over here, and this is another government ministry, we can query each other's database to pull the information that is required under the right circumstances as governed by the Data Protection Act. But no two agencies ever directly talk to each other. That e-services platform becomes the place you make the query through that platform. Platform takes it and then sends it to the next ministry. That ministry then sends back its information back through the platform. It is labeled, it is documented, you see who accessed the information, and then that information then goes to the other. So that there is never that direct link between the two, but that platform creates almost like a highway across which the queries and exchange of information will happen. And every single transaction is actually logged and documented in clear and specific ways that the citizen, him or herself, can then query who requested my data, when did they do it, and what was the purpose. When the system is fully built out, that is going to be one of the benefits of the e-services platform linked with the digital ID, where we can place all the services of government on that platform, and then we will be able then to use it as an exchange highway, data exchange highway. And that was just an aside, sir. So, as I said, This bill seeks to facilitate what is called a digital ID. Now, in Barbados, sir, we have come to associate our identity with an ID card, that little blue laminated ID card that we walk around with. But the truth is, that ID card is not your identity. It is a representation, a physical representation of your identity, because it contains information that will allow people to identify you as who you say you are. But the card is not your identity, it's just a token. It is just a physical representation of it. Just as you have that physical representation, you can also have a digital representation of your identity. And so a digital ID is simply that digital representation of a collection of information that identifies you as who you say you are. And that is a very simplistic way of my explaining what a digital ID is, but it is used for the purpose of understanding, taking out a lot of the technical language out of it. Now, the important thing about a digital ID is that it is a way that someone can authenticate you and say that you are who you say you really are when you're online. Just as our physical ID, you can take your physical laminated ID, sir, and carry it and give it to somebody, and they will look at the picture and they will look at you and they will now say, okay, yes, you are who you are, and they will look at your signature and compare it to another signature and say, yes, this is who you really are. And that can only work if you are physically with them, or if you send a letter and tell somebody they can carry this and then they have that authorization. What is happening is that this is an analog ID card, but we're living in a digital world. And while it has served us well since 1979, or thereabouts, it is not necessarily the type of identity that is going to take us into the next normal, where we are living in digital. And therefore, we need the type of identity system and mechanisms and tools and tokens that will allow us not just to be able to be identified online, but that we can also carry our identity on our phones. And so this will enable not just the smart card, which is a token that carries the data on your identity, but it is also, you can also have a replica of this on your phone, whereby you can now have a mobile ID, and you can choose to do one or the other. You can choose to do both, whichever you would choose, sir. Now, I want to speak a little bit, sir, about the new smart ID card, which is a token that carries information about you as part of your digital identity, sir. Many people have raised questions as to what it is and what information will be on it. Sir, the simple way that I can explain to this chamber and the people of this country about the new national ID, let's break it down into three things. What is on the card, which you can actually look at and see and read. What is in the card, which is on the chip that is embedded in the card. And what is accessible using the card, which means it's neither on it, you can't see it, it's not in the chip that's on it, but by using it, it gives you access to some other services or information. What I would say to you, sir, is that what will be on the card is explained within this bill so that you know exactly what you will be able to see on the card. I am just going to go through a few of them, but certainly they're already in the bill. And as I call them out, you'll notice that there are no more, well, just one or two things a little extra that you currently have on this same ID. Your full name, your ID number, your date of birth, your sex, your nationality, your date, the date of expiry of the card, your photograph, your signature, nothing unusual. What will also be on, sir, would be other data such as your residency status, and your, for example, disabilities. And I want to have that conversation because when we met with the community of persons with disability, there was quite a debate as to whether or not we should have on the card, meaning that you can actually see when you look, whether or not we should put disability there. And what that community determined as we were designing, they determined they want to have the option. Because there were some persons who wanted to have it on simply because they did not have the ability to speak and communicate with people, and so they wanted, when they have to use their ID, for people to see right away that they have some type of particular disability. There were some persons who are on the autism spectrum who said, yes, they definitely want that because sometimes it can be that challenge. There were other persons, other members of that community who for various reasons said, yes, we want to have the option for people to know, one, there's a disability, and we want the option ourselves to determine if we want that disability identified. And we therefore then chose to use the World Health Organization. There are certain international standards that are used in terms of codifying what those disabilities are, and that was an agreement that we made in collaboration with persons with disabilities. And so that's one of the things that would be on the card, but it is optional. Choice of the person. And you don't have to be a person with this, you would of course seek to have that. In the card, what is in the card and what's in the chip? Now I know a number of people have been saying, why, what is in the chip? And this has worried a whole bunch of people. What we have done is we have made sure that what is in the card, what is in the chip is really what's on the card itself. So what you can already see on the card, which would include a digital representation of your photograph and other things. It will also have your place of birth, and it will also have the verification certificates that said, yes, indeed, this is true and legitimate, and you are part of the National Register, and you have got your issuing certificate that is part of that chip. No, it will not have on health information. No, it will not have on your address. There are certain things that will not be in that chip. There are certain things, remember I said there are three things. What's on it that you can see, what's in it that's in the chip, but what can be accessed by it. And then, of course, you can now link to any number of databases. You can link to a health database once the health services system has set up a proper database that we are satisfied is at a standard that can safely link to it. You can link to an address database that will allow people to pull that information. And one of the reasons we didn't put it on, but we made it accessible through the card, is because people will from time to time change their addresses really fast. And we did not want that you have to bring back in your card to get things changed because it was written on your card, because that would mean once we print it on there, every time you change your address, you have to come in and change it. That did not make sense. So therefore, you can access that through a safe interface that's being created, and you can then update that from time to time, and as it updates, the card automatically will be able to pull from that secure database. And I went a little off there, sir, because I know that there were a number of questions about what is and isn't on it, in it, and accessible by it, and I want people to know that no, some of the rumors that I have heard out there are definitely not true. Now, what will you be able to do with this ID? One of the things that we will be able to do now is that we have consolidated your driver's license with your national ID. So you don't have to walk with a driver's license and walk with your ID. Now, for some people who may go overseas and need to drive, they may very well then have to get another driver's license. But as we looked at the percentage Barbadians who were doing that, etc., we recognize that, you know what, let us solve for the majority, and for the minority then we will find other solutions, which could mean that you can get. In addition, the technology is improving globally, where even if you go to rent a car, now that technology is there, where even if you're in a different country, if they have the right type of technology, they will be able to scan and be able to pull up your driver's license in different ways. So we had to be able to put in place a card for where we're heading, not just for where we are right now. And we thought also that you will renew your driver's license at different times. And your driver's license, therefore, will have different expiry. If we were to put it on it, as some people say, why isn't the back part just your full driver's license? Because it will expire. And that means whenever that driver's license expires, you renew it, we would then have to reissue with the car. So we said no. One of those things that you will be accessible through it would indeed be your driver's license. And as that database upgrades, so anyone who scans your car will be able to see your driver's license in its updated state, as opposed to having to change the card every single time that you made an update, etc. You will also be able to be authenticated. What does that mean? Without getting too technical, if you are online, we need to say that you are who you say you are. And there are, without my getting very technical, there are many ways in which you can authenticate a person. Many of you now are familiar with things like your PIN. You can go and stand by any ATM. You don't have to be standing up in front of somebody in the bank. And you push your card in, and by putting in your 4-digit number, you are now able to tell them, yes, first I have the card, and 2, I have the PIN that goes with it. And that oftentimes gives them a sense of comfort that, yes, this person may be who they say they are. Now, the kind of authentication that we will be using with this card is what we call two-factor authentication. What that means is that there are two things that has to be present in order for us to then be able to say, yes, you are who you say you are. And I'm going to just break it down into simple language. You can be authenticated by something you know, which could be a password. I know the password. A PIN. I know the PIN. A password. I know the passphrase. Something you know. It could be something you have. I have a key. I have a card. I have a registered mobile device on the system. So it's something you have. And you can also be authenticated by something that you are. So your fingerprint, your face, any of those kinds of attributes that are who you are can be used. So again, you can be authenticated by something you know, something you have, or something you are. And we take 2 of those in order for us to be able to authenticate within this system. So I started to share that because a number of people were asking, how do you authenticate? Just as how you will authenticate a person right now, if I'm standing in front of you, you look at that picture, you look at me, and you say yes. The same way the signature, you look at my signature, you look at this, and you say yes. So that is actually 2 ways in which you will be able to use it. You are using biometrics in this case, which will be facial recognition, and signature would be, of course, something that you know how to sign in a particular way. So again, there's a 2-factor authentication system in there that we will be using in this regard. Now, many people have asked questions about security and this card. Remember, the card is not your identity. It is just a token that provides a representation of information that lets you know who you really are. Now, the smart card, which you will be issued when we register the population, it has electronic security features similar to e-passports, and many of us don't even know that our passports are really and truly have e-passport type of features in it. And why? Because we have used the similar ICAO standards, ICA, that governs the travel industry and passports. We have used their similar standards to be able, in the design and the development of this. And when the rest of the region and indeed the rest of the world is ready, because we have already built in the design of certain international standards, your new smart card will be able to be used as a travel document when that time comes. Please do not say that we say it's going to be a travel document right away, because remember, for it to be used as a travel document, it means the rest of the world have certain things in place and certain things are reciprocal, and there's certain agreements, and all those things have to be in place. But what we have done, as I said, we have built for the future, so that as the technology evolves, we don't have to tell you, bring back in that card again, so that we can now move you into where the trend and where the development is going, certainly on that side. The card is also not made of this type of laminate where you can peel off the side and stick something inside and stick back the laminate. It is being made of a particular type of material which provides multi-year use, and in fact, it is very difficult for you to be able, in fact, you can't even break into it in the way that it is. The printing process that is being used, it ensures that the information that is there is tamper-proof. There are other security features. I'm not going to go into all of them, such as holograms and shifting images and ultraviolet printing, and other types of features are built onto this that it is going to be very hard for somebody to be able. I will never say never. You'll never know. The world is an innovative world we live in. But we have certainly done everything to use the highest standards to make sure that it is safe. It is also based on our conversations with persons with disabilities. The back of the card will have a tactile piece, so that persons who have visual problems will still be able to be identified, to identify which side of the card is which and how they will be able to present it, even if they have to be in person, etc. So there are a number of security features that are built into card, but let's go beyond the card. Let's look at the very system, the identity management system. We have had to partner with international partners who are leaders in identity management globally, and their standards are very stringent. And they have done the inspection of our systems, and they are insisting that every way from how we actually develop, how we test, how we produce, that the environments in which this is done, in terms of how we use this card, that it meets certain international standards. And they will not do business with us unless, indeed, as a country, we have met those standards which are there. So you can understand, sir, it is not just us looking after the security the way we want, but we have to meet certain standards in order to work with certain international partners. But it is not only how we are designing and setting up the system, it is equally, there's an audit process that is built in. This, we have to be audited. This new system has to be audited annually. It is built into the policy document and into the arrangements that we have. And there are certain penalties should we not meet certain standards as a result of that audit. And when I say penalties, not that we have to pay something, but whereby you have to fix certain things within a certain period of time in order to maintain your status to be able to issue this type of digital identity certificates. And even after that, when we talk about now, if it wasn't designed that way and the safeguards weren't there, and if during audit we are discovered not to be compliant and being in compliance with the standards that are necessary, should something happen, we have to have the capacity to be able to respond and to remediate. And built into that policy is a matter of within how many hours you have to be able to do certain things, recall certain certificates, stop certain things, report certain things, etc. So there are standards that are built in that allow our response. So it's not just how you design it and how you're going to audit and be able to remediate, but equally how you will be able to respond in the event that something happens. All of those are built in to the system that we have signed on to, and we are bound by those standards. This bill, sir, as we go through it, is very specific in terms of how, if we look at part 2, which is clauses 4 to 9, sir, it identifies who shall be obligated to register. Indeed, if we look at clause 5, it gives you the list of persons who are obligated to register. In other words, you don't choose to register or not. The truth is, if you do not register, you will not have the same privilege and access to services in some ways. It's impossible for us to authenticate you online. It's impossible for us to do certain things. In addition, you will discover that your ID, your old ID, will expire 12 months after the coming into effect of this act. And so it behooves everyone to really and truly make sure that once the act comes into effect, that you're able to go through a process which has already been set up by the electoral department, others to be able to help people get re-registered in a very timely manner. And let me take this opportunity to share a little bit about that. Part of the pilot that we will be running as we start to re-register the population for the first time, the population of Barbados will be able to register online. And I want to be able to break that down. What do I mean by that? There are 3 steps in that registration process. There is when you register or you present yourself, where you say, my name is Kay McConney, this is my age, this is my date of birth, etc. So I have now presented that information. The second step now is that has to be verified. So there need to be evidence that proves that what I have said is the truth. And then the third step is my actually getting my ID. So you've got the registration or the presentation of yourself, you've got the verification of what you claim to be the case, and then of course you have the issuance of your document. And according to the standards by which we do have to operate, at least one of those steps must be done in person. And so even if you were to present your information online, one of the other 2 steps will have to be done in person for us to validate and authenticate you as who you really are. And so that, you will hear a lot more about that because that whole re-registration process will be done through the electoral department, and they have already put a plan in place, and they have started to recruit their teams and to get ready to be able to move. Of course, this time has certainly slowed us down, this COVID time, but we will certainly be ramping up as soon as we can in order to be able to move this process. And you will hear more about that in due course. As we look, as people are registering and we look at the particulars of, as I said, what will be kept, the information and the data that will be kept in our national register, you can look at Schedule 1 of the bill to be able to get the details. We talked about the presentation of document and the need for evidence to establish the truth. There are also procedures for registering, which I shared some of them just now. And we talked about fingerprinting, where I know a number of people were concerned that are we going to have these fingerprints, and can we get now a number of people, including some persons who are older, including some persons with disabilities, the community of persons with disability have asked that fingerprints be an option. Fingerprints are not mandatory. They are there for those people who choose to provide them as a biometric, as part of their identity. A number of people have said they have arthritis and they're not able, or they have some kind of illness that doesn't allow them to sign or write. Some people have said, for whatever reasons, they're unable to write. They may not have the literacy level, and they have said that there is an interest in then using something else that is incontrovertible, in this case, the fingerprints. So fingerprints are not mandatory. They are an option. And in any case, you can choose to give all 10. You can choose to give just the pinky on the left hand. So you can choose to give all 10 prints. You can choose to give 1. You can choose to give 2. You can choose to give whatever you choose. That is an option where the person gives their consent, and then, of course, they choose how many digits they would wish to have in the system. And no, the fingerprints are not stored on the chip either. In fact, there is without going into the technology, for those who know a little bit of technology and those of you who like to research, there's a hash system that is used, whereby once you give your fingerprint, it is given in such a way that we cannot reconstruct it after it has been taken. And what will happen is we can compare what they call one hash, one print that is provided to the hash that is in the system. Again, I don't want to get into all the technical details at this time because that's not the purpose of this bill, is just to let you know. But the truth is we have no way of reconstituting that fingerprint after, well, immediately. But there is a system. I'm sure the technical people at the right time will be able to explain that. But the bottom line is, 1, it is not mandatory. 2, if you choose to give it, we are in no position to be able to reproduce your fingerprint in anywhere. And no, it is not stored on the chip either. All right. When we look at parts 3, which is clauses 10 to 15 of this bill, The smart ID will be valid for 10 years, or for however long the commission determines it to be. The card, we know what it will have on it, we know what it will have in it. We can look at Schedule 5 to be able to get a little bit more detail. The card will be free of cost to first-time residents, to registrants. However, if you damage or you lose the card, you would then have to pay for a replacement. And if you look at the third schedule to this bill, it certainly outlines what those kinds of costs would be. But of course, the card will be free, given free to those who are eligible to be part of the National Register as an outset. And then there are some exemptions. Even if you lost it and you damaged it and you're over 65 or you're a person with disability without the ability to pay, et cetera, there are, again, within this bill, the exemptions under which that fee could be waived or where you can be exempt from doing certain other things. Now, just as it is with your passport, this card belongs to the government of Barbados, so the government of Barbados has the right to revoke it at any point in time, just as they do your passport or anything else. It is no different than what it is now. Once a card is replaced or it is expired, you have to return the old one, so you don't get to keep bits, two sets of cards. The commission, of course, has the power to ask that the card be surrendered for various reasons, and they are outlined in clause 15 on page 26. Your use of ID. Now, you can use your ID the same way that you use this ID, this laminated ID right now. You can choose to use it only like this if this is the only way you want to use it. But understand that there are other services that will be brought on in phases. Not all services will be accessible right out of the block, because each of them takes a different infrastructure and different kinds of resources to be able to make sure we are maintaining the right kinds of standards, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we will do is we will start adding those services over the next several months, so that as they come on stream, you can then say, I want to use my ID, my smart card to be able to do this. I want to use my mobile ID to do whatever. We are not forcing anyone to, but understand that you can choose to use your smart card the same way you always have, or you can choose to use it to access the additional services that will be available for your convenience, that is also safe, that will likely be at a lower cost, and to be able to make your life just that little bit more easy, a little bit easier. Now, when we look at part 4, it looks at the issuing of credentials. That is somewhat technical, and I will leave it for you to look, but basically this is the credentials that say that this is a real and legitimate ID that you got from the identity management system, and there are a bunch of certificates and other things that go as a part of it. Finally, part 5 deals with security, confidentiality, verification, and information sharing. You do know that we do have the Data Protection Act that has been passed. It has not been proclaimed, but it will be shortly, as it is important for us to be able to do that before we actually roll out this idea, and things and work is afoot right now to ensure that that can be proclaimed. I was informed that the Ministry of the Public Service has now moved closer towards selecting the Data Protection Commissioner, and therefore, once the Data Protection Commissioner is on board, as well as the Act proclaimed, we will be in a much better position to develop the regulations and be able to roll this out. There are options that we have available. We are determining at this time you may be able to proclaim part of the Act that doesn't require regulations and then proclaim the rest of it at a different time. We are now working through that, but do know that that Act will be proclaimed, and that the relevant personnel will be involved at the very top as the Data Protection Commissioner in order to help Barbados to be able to navigate its way through here. Part 6 speaks of complaints and appeals. I will not go into that, Mr. President. And part 7 deals with offenses. And I want to talk a little bit about offenses, because people will find inventive ways to be dishonest. People will seek to impersonate. People will seek to tamper. People will seek to manipulate data. People will seek to do many things. And certainly this Act addresses these things. It anticipates that they may very well be. We know that most Barbadians are honest people. But there are some people who are not as honest as the majority of us. And therefore, we have to make sure that there is a law in place that deals with unauthorized access and people seeking to get around the system or to trick the system. Nothing is foolproof, but we have certainly done our best to cover as many holes as we can at this point in time. And no law is static. As we learn and as we go through this process, we will continue to tighten and to strengthen and to make sure that we have the right kinds of systems in place. Now, there is a number of other clauses that are here that I will not go over because I am unaware, sir, that my time is drawing nigh for me to conclude. But I want to talk a little bit at this end about communication. Now, when we have had, when I say we, I mean the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology and the Electoral and Boundaries Office under the Cabinet Office, which falls under the Prime Minister, the Honourable Mayor Motley. We have been working in collaboration with a number of entities, public, private, and priority communities like persons with disabilities and others who have been a part of that. They have been a part of the steering team that has been set up, which includes National Insurance Scheme, the Welfare Department, Licensing Authority, the Immigration Department, the Barbados Banking Association, the Association with Responsibility for, Oversight for the Credit Unions, Electoral Department. There are a number of public and private entities and priority communities that have been a part of the steering team that is making this happen. We also started consultations since last year. In April, May, we started consultations with the police because, of course, if you're now going to have your driver's license, they have to have the ability to scan and read, and they need to understand, need to let us know what has to be on, etc. With the police, with the Insurance Association, with the Transport Authority and the PSV operators, with the Welfare Department, with persons with disability, with the Central Bank, with the Intergenerational, and recently, just a couple of weeks ago on January, I believe it was the 22nd of January, we had focus group with regular everyday public, different age groups, different genders, different levels of savvy with technology, etc. And they looked at the system that we were putting up, and they also were able to vet the communications that we will shortly be moving out into the public, and they gave us their feedback, and we have made. So consultations have certainly been wide. We have been doing it over a period of months, and really where we have reached today is because of the input of a number of players, and I want to thank them for the input they have made so that we are now able to take it to the wider public with a full understanding that this was truly a contribution by the people of this country in terms of where we have arrived. I will not spend a long time on our communication plan, but I will want to share with you that we want to build awareness, public awareness as well as business awareness, because you will have both producers of the ID and consumers of the ID. Many of the businesses out there who will want to authenticate people and onboard customers without necessarily having the person have to be in front of them will be able to access and use this system in a way that is beneficial and reduces their onboarding costs and really and truly the whole efficiencies in their systems. In order to do that, it will take time to build those relationships and to make sure that the system is ready and that they have the technology in place that allows their systems to talk to ours and to be able to derive the benefit from it. We are in consultation with those. So there's that awareness at both the public and the business level and the governmental level. There is public education. What are the services that you can and how do you use them and how do you stay safe online? And how do you become your own human firewall in this new digital age? So that is all part of the communication and education program. There will be mail-outs to the home. We have already designed it, and in fact, the focus groups that we have had of regular everyday citizens have vetted them and told us what to change when the language needed to be different. Does it need to be prettier? Do you need a picture here? Those kinds of things, so that when we start to put that information out there, it has certainly been vetted as well by some everyday Barbadians through the focus group process. As I said, there'll be mail-outs to home for people who are not digital and they're not on social media and would prefer to have a piece of something in their hand that they can refer to. We recognize that there's that part of the society as well. There'll be billboards, there'll be radio, there'll be television, and there will also be, we recognize that many people, in order to get on board, to have an uptake, will actually need somebody standing and holding their hand through the process as they learn. And so we have got a team of digital ambassadors and others of different ages that we're constantly recruiting who will be able to be there just as we have been there for them at different times during the last couple of years as the public has chosen to uptake some of the services that have been in place. There will also be influencers of various demographics who will be able to appeal to the particular groups who will be a part of this. Mr. President, I could go on about what we have done, but I believe, sir, that I have spoken about why the identity management system. I have spoken about what the digital ID is and all the, not all, but a significant part of the key things the public have been asking about where it is concerned. We have been able to look at the communication, and we've been able to look at this bill itself. In conclusion, sir, I want to say that the government, we really have to start engaging now on the implications of the global trends on our everyday lives. And even if the technologies and even if citizen behavior and even if citizen education and our policies are still developing, we really have to start moving. And it is just part of the iterative world that we are part of now, where you start and you learn and you grow and you develop as you move forward. Those countries and businesses, Mr. President, who can go ahead, who can get ahead, and who can work to understand their unique circumstances in this world that is emerging, these are the ones who will be able to position themselves to take a strategic approach to managing the changes in the short term, and equally to being able to seize the opportunity over the long term. It is with these few words, Mr. President, that I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator Mahoney. Senator Greenwich.
Mr. President, I want to make a very brief intervention. Indeed, sir. I had initially said I would try and speak for about 10 minutes. But having heard the presentation of Senator McConney, I think I'll try and cut it down to about 3 minutes. Try hard to do that. Mr. President, this bill is called the Barbados Identity Management Bill. But I do believe that most of the persons up there listening to the debate will see this debate really as one that deals with the issuance of a new ID card in Barbados. That, sir, will be the highlight of this legislation. Sir, I believe that right now, all you need is a good printer and a good scanner. And that can give you a good reproduction of our ID card as it stands now. Just get a little bit of plastic, a little bit of laminate on one side and a little bit on the other. And in a minute, I'll try to tell you why I describe it like that. Senator McConney, when she was speaking, sir, made the point that laminate and plastic can be easily peeled off. And that is so true. And I do not think that where the present ID card stands now, that is good enough. I do believe, sir, that we in Barbados should support every measure which government takes to make our national ID card as safe and as secure as possible. I understand, sir, that this new card is going to have more security features, including the chip that Senator McConney spoke about. She described that chip, sir, as an electronic security feature. And, sir, I welcome that. Indeed, I welcome this as a sign of the times. There has been no change, especially security change, not since 1979. That is some 42 years ago in our ID card. And so, sir, this will be an ID card with different features to the one that we've become so accustomed to. It will be, as the senator described, a multi-purpose card, which will incorporate your driver's license and your fingerprint, which is optional, as she has said, and volunteered disability information, again, optional. And I have to say that sometimes I know that people are skeptical and they're a bit tentative when it comes to giving such information about their disabilities and so on. But I have known of cases, sir, where allergies and the fact that someone had a bracelet because they were allergic to whether it be penicillin or whatever it was, that saved their life. And, sir, such information can sometimes be extremely beneficial to the person, in this case, who will be carrying a card. I also know of a good friend of mine who has steel in his hip. And whenever he goes through a scanner at the airport, he has to spend sometimes an extra 15, 20 minutes when people are trying to scan and to ask questions of him, while we've all passed and gone. And sometimes these little things can make the difference. And I do believe that this is an instance where people having such disabilities can almost without any fear make such information available. Sir, words such as flimsy, words such as primitive and basic, I've heard them, have been used to describe our ID card in the form that it now stands. And sometimes, being a Barbadian and hearing it described that way by others, so it can be hurtful, it can be embarrassing. And I do believe, sir, that we were badly in need of an upgrade. And I've always observed, sir, that today, most of the bank cards, most of the credit cards, most of the mega stores cards seem to be more sturdy, to be more durable, and indeed to be more acceptable and more secure than our ID cards. It is indeed time to make a change. An upgrade, sir, is absolutely essential. Our ID card, as I said, sir, in its present form, that ID card can be called, in other words, obsolete. Sir, we must bring our ID card into line with international ID cards. Internationally, sir, we have been lagging behind. As Senator McCauley says, this one now, we are meeting international standards, and as she says, we must be up to date or else. I recall being in Miami a few years ago, and there was a young lady at the bank who was insisting that I show her 2 pieces of ID. I had my passport, and I showed her my Barbados identification card. And it was there that I got that description. She said, this looked like a piece of paper covered with plastic. Piece of paper covered with plastic. And that wasn't all. A trip or 2 after that, at the hotel, they wanted again 2 pieces of ID. And I gave them my passport, good. My Barbados ID card. It was a check-in. And I almost didn't get the room. You know, they refused to accept the Barbados identification card. And strangely enough, they accepted my driver's license. And I had to explain and virtually argue with the receptionist that in any form of ranking anywhere in the world, a driver's license should not take precedence over an ID card. A driver's license, Barbados driver's license, taking precedence over a Barbados ID card. So it would appear that in many instances, the Barbados ID card as it stands now is almost limited to use in Barbados only. And sad to say, because it is so basic an ID card, it is not accepted in many places. Has very little information on it. And I remain of the view, sir, that if it is made more official looking and carries more information on it, it will become more widely accepted. People can be desperate, people from all walks of life, sir. And they say that, in fact, it can also give you another experience recently, not recent, it's about 2 years ago, which we had as we were just about to play a game of cards in the evening. We didn't even want to play those cards because the discussion was centered around how desperate people can be. There was a story on the US, one of those had to do with a woman, a pregnant woman, and another friend of hers, and one lady decided she was going to take the baby from the pregnant woman. She wanted the baby so badly that is what she did. Actually murdered the woman to get the baby. And that started the argument. And we argued about that, how desperate some people can. Why am I saying that, sir? I'm saying that, sir, because Barbadians who live here in Barbados may never have to be desperate when it comes to getting a Barbados ID card. We may never have to be desperate, because our status is assured, and we don't have to go to lengths to get one. But Mr. President, there are some non-Barbadians who want to live and who want to remain in Barbados even more than some of us do. And they have their reasons. And some of those reasons are desperate reasons. And these persons, sir, are willing to go to lengths to get a Barbados ID card. There's one gentleman, I have every right to believe him for where he works. And he has told me that he was offered $20,000 to obtain a Barbados ID card for a non-national. They're willing to pay money to get the ID card. Sir, the Barbados passport and the Barbados ID card have always been in high demand in this region. It is common knowledge, Mr. President, that persons belonging to other Caribbean jurisdictions have come into Barbados and have tried to forge an ID card. You see, sir, it is easier for them to get a United States visa if they have a Barbados ID card than with their own ID card. And so they're desperate. Sometimes it has to do with someone who is living here and who wants to get surgery at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and they know that if they have a Barbados ID card, they may not have to pay. They're desperate. And I have known about 3 or 4 examples of young ladies, not Barbadians, who were pregnant and who wanted to have a child born in Barbados of Barbadian parents and who needed the ID card to prove that they were Barbadian. Sir, one of the main reasons why we do not get thousands on top of thousands of ID card fraud in Barbados is because in most cases that you need an ID card, you have to, as a stepping stone, get a birth certificate, a Barbados birth certificate first. And that is where a lot of the problem comes. And were it not for that bottleneck, I'm telling you, sir, there would have been a lot more frauds here where our ID card is concerned. Because it's, as we said earlier, it's easy to duplicate. But you have to get over that hurdle. Sometimes that's the only thing. You know, sir, you will go into a district, you will find the name of this young person, 30 years or 38 or whatever, who has died, and you try to impersonate that person. And so what the fraudster does is to get the name, Geraldine Clark, she's the one who died. And now you have to go and get a birth certificate for Geraldine Clark before you can get that ID card. And so you apply for it. The person goes into the registry, they apply for the birth certificate, and then they have to answer some questions, because you don't just go and apply for it and get one. And you need to give them some information. Mother's name, that's Geraldine Clark, who died, give her name, father's name, because you need this information. Sometimes you might have got the birth date from someone in the district. But here you are now, and you are in front the deputy registrar, assistant registrar, whoever is going to get the birth certificate for you, the officer in charge. And when they ask these questions, I have known of a case where the young lady who was actually sitting down making the application was in so much trouble and was sweating so much, asked to be excused, and never came back. Never came back. That hurdle sometimes, you know, getting the birth certificate can be sometimes an insurmountable hurdle. Sir, sections 24 and 25, and it says a person who impersonates, that's section 24, or attempts to impersonate another person, whether dead or alive, real or imaginary, by providing any false information, is guilty of an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of 40,000 or to imprisonment for 6 months or both. That's section 24. Section 25 goes on. A person who intentionally discloses, transmits, copies, or otherwise disseminates any identity information collected in the course of registration or authentication to any person not authorized under this act is guilty of an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of 40,000 or imprisonment for 6 months or both. So if you are caught forging the Barbados ID card, it's 40,000. And if you are assisting that person, it's 40,000. I think, sir, that is sufficient to act as a deterrent. Personally, sir, I would have rounded it off at 50,000. I think that 50,000 has a bit more magic in it than 40,000. But I can live, sir, with the 40,000. Because one thing I can say, sir, is that there should be no little slap on the wrist when it comes to forgery of our ID card. You do not take up a person's ID card just so by mistake. It's something you're set out to do. And you do not reproduce a person's ID card by mistake either. It is something you set out to do. And I also like the idea, Mr. President, of speaking in the actual bill. You don't go outside the bill, but you speak in the actual bill where the offense is committed, and you tell them there what the penalty is actually in the bill itself. I like that idea. I think it has become very fashionable, and I agree with it 100%. So, I remember saying I was going to speak for 3 minutes, but it seems as though I've gone over it just a little bit.
A little bit.
Mr. President, I am not going to sit unless I say a few words about and put in a plug for our electoral office. Because this department, in my opinion, sir, does not get the credit that it deserves. It is not the kind of limelight department like so many others. There are others that do excellent work and people talk about them all the time. They do good work. Nobody can be vexed when people speak of the UDC or the RDC or town planning or school meals or transport board or any of the others. They do good work, and the electoral department does good work as well. And so I have to say that the reason why we in Barbados can boast of having smooth and uneventful elections is due in large measure to that particular department. And you only have to look at the way in which the last by-election which we had here in this country, the very masterful and skillful way in which that was executed. And you'll see that that department does a considerable amount of good work. And they did it at very short notice too. But so that department is not only known to be working at election time, those people also have to purge the lists, they have to update and upgrade and replace the ID cards and so on. And when our famous Bajan Yankees come in here, come to Barbados, they go in there in droves to get their ID cards. People who live overseas still come home to get ID cards and so on. Sometimes they're there by the scores. And there are also things like non-nationals who, when they get their status, you know, their citizenship and so on, they want their ID cards, and so they go in there. So the electoral office, they do very good work, and we must, from time to time, commend them. Mr. President, sir, I know I've gone over the 3 minutes, but I want to give my full support, sir, to this Barbados Identity Management Bill. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Greenidge. Senator Boyce.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You know, Mr. President, there's an anecdote that if you hear a lawyer say they're going to talk for a few minutes, make yourself comfortable and prepare for a long haul. So when I saw the Deputy President indicate he was speaking for 3 minutes, I immediately turned to my colleague on the right, social distance, and said, I actually had to write it. I think I have it here. I said, when a lawyer says he will speak short, expect a long speech. So here's the evidence, sir, maintaining my social distance as we were having our tete-a-tete. Now, Mr. President, I rise to have a discussion about this legislation, and I was here for the entire proceedings this time, so duly armed with the different points of discourse, I would like to make a contribution to the same. Firstly, sir, I've heard all the mock sport about our card, and I brought mine. Maybe just to show some people that it's blue, I don't know, Mr. President. I have my ID card here, sir. And this card has been with me on some very wholesome adventures, sir. And just as indicated by other members in this House, it is somewhat subject to scrutiny when it's deployed as a form of identification in a jurisdiction other than ours. So certainly, there can be no doubt that there is a need for modernizing this item, which I was set out by Senator Greenidge, was last done in 1979. However, sir, I believe that there are 3 major issues which we need to be mindful of in light of this process, and is a process which is necessary given the fact that the period from 1979 to 2021, approximately 2 generations, sir. And now we have a generation that certainly resides more in this world and in the digital one with an equal amount of time. And it's not just the youngsters, Mr. President, but certainly a very large part of the population finds themselves indulging in the virtual world that's passed on by these devices, sir. And I'll come back to that. Sir, the said device which I just held up, being a smartphone, indicates one of my major concerns with this proposal, wherein that we are seeking to modernize our identification system But we have to be mindful of the likely misinformation, and that's putting it at the lower end of the spectrum, or the probable deliberate disinformation by persons who seek at this time to create mischief. Sir, we saw what happened when the vaccines were first being rolled out, with persons who had time on their hands were making videos suggesting all manner of things in relation to that which was actually done. We have a scenario here where we're having a discourse about improving the ID card and in bringing certain information to bear with regard to its utilization. This time, sir, when persons are at heightened awareness, we need to be careful. We need to be careful how we roll it out, and I was very comforted by the words echoed by the leader of government business with regard to this bill as to how that will be done. But first concern, sir, relates to the reference to the issue of biometric data, which will be included in reference to the card, sir. Now, sir, the biometric data is data relating to the physical, physiological, or behavior characteristics of the individual. In other words, sir, the unique ID that constitutes who you are. Now, this data itself falls under the definition of sensitive personal data and therefore triggers the obligation of the Data Protection Act and, of course, the attendant penalties of any breaches of such an act. So the first thing we need to be concerned about and we need to educate the populace about is why is the biometric data being required? We need to educate persons so that those who are more conspiracy theorist minded or more vulnerable to suggestion of conspiracy are able to have their fears addressed with regard to this being piloted or suggested to be some sort of dystopian slicer. We are in fact easy targets to these type of markets and these type of suggestions in these troubling times, sir. And I think it's important that the government reiterate why the biometric data is needed in any educational campaign that goes out with regard to this item. Now, so personally, sir, for my part, those who know me will tell you I'm a big fan of security. I'm a big fan of ID cards. I'm a big fan of identification. I'm a big fan of voluntary disclosure, sir. That's me personally. The public may not share that enthusiasm, sir, and we need to be mindful of this fact when this project is rolled out, Mr. President. The second concern, sir, was raised when our colleague, Minister McConney, Senator Minister McConney, raised the issue of the integrated platform and the access to the integrated platform by utilization of the updated ID card. Sir, I will just sound a word of caution coming out of the Jamaican decision of Julian Robinson versus the Attorney General of Jamaica. Now, while at the time Jamaica was seeking a more stringent form of biodata, and let me just give you an idea of what they were seeking, Mr. President. This is an extract from the decision of the Court of Appeal in Jamaica, sir. And what the government in Jamaica was seeking at the time was biological information and biometric information in the form of photograph, facial features, fingerprint, retina, iris scan, vein pattern, footprint, toe print, and palm print. That, of course, was struck down by the courts as being somewhat excessive, Mr. President, but the main issue related to the fact that the utilization of the card was linked to access to certain government portals. And the court took the position that if you say you have to have a card to access portals, but you do not have to have a card for certain persons, example, non-nationals, that was a discriminatory requirement. So we need to be careful when it's rolled out, and I'm sure that the government will be getting the necessary legal advice to ensure that there is no breach of what is the safeguard to allow all persons to have access. In other words, if you need to have this card to do government business, you need to have a workaround for persons who wish to do business without the card, or else it's going to be a case of discrimination, I submit, or at least someone will raise a challenge to it. And the authority is clear, and it's there for those who wish to go and have a look, sir. What I do like about it, and as we are on the point of the Jamaica situation, was that this proposal or this legislation requires that consent is the key. And I think that the government should be commended for the fact that any form of biodata which is to be given in terms of the fingerprint has to be given by consent. And Mr. President, I was speaking with a friend of mine from the Malta Hill Poet Society, and he indicated that when we travel, we have no problem going to the United States and giving up our identification to get inside the United States. However, that is an option. That is a choice. Some may say, as a Barbadian, why do I have to give up my fingerprint to get access to the card? And that is why I like the fact that it requires the consent of the individual. This is the type of educated position that needs to be pushed, because there will be misinformation about this. There will be disinformation about this. There will be persons who will seek to link this to the situation currently with the vaccine just for the sake of worthlessness, Mr. President. And the government needs to be able to counter any fears that are raised, whether they are raised from a sensible position or they are raised from a position, sir, of fear. Sir, the third point relates to the security of the information held. I believe that Senator McConney has indicated how this is to be done by the third-party providers and the strictness of the tests. I would, however, say that in the recent JAM COVID web portal expose, sir, and it's available on the news to see what happened, in Jamaica, the third-party experts who were hired to provide the online platform for the COVID patient information in Jamaica has now been subject to scrutiny because of allegations that that information was not secured. When you're dealing with biodata, when you're dealing with this type of sensitive information, you need to be clear that you have the necessary protective mechanisms in place to ensure that is not violated, because it is such a juicy right target for those persons out there who will seek to utilize this data, and not for the examples given by the Deputy President. The examples given by the Deputy President, sir, are clear, are real. But in this world that we existing now, in terms of the most valuable resource being information, persons seek to have access to this biodata to allow them to do certain online transactions, certain ID hacks and other threats to less a security, but more of a financial gain by their activities. Fourthly, sir, this information in terms of the register is not going to be accessible to the public. And I haven't had time to drill down on it, but I believe that we should be sure and we should be educating persons the difference between this list and the list of electors in relation to the Representation of Persons Act. In that one is available, so persons like Deputy President Greenwich can go through and do his list checking when he needs to do his list checking. I've only heard about it, sir. I wouldn't know how it's utilized, but I understand that politicians need that list for whatever activities they may be doing when they're out in the huskins, sir. And the difference between that list and the National Register list, I think, needs to be made clear so that persons who have any questions would understand the difference and which one is security and which one is public. Sir, at the end of the day, these steps need to be taken. The key is how we bring across, and I was very glad to hear it mentioned with regard to the education plan. Now, the education plan, sir, needs to be tied in with the rollout of the data protection education program, which is supposed to be brought out to educate persons with regard to the obligations under the Data Protection Act. Of course, that would have been impacted by COVID, sir, but if we are going to be rolling out this piece of legislation, it is my suggestion, sir, that we deal with the data protection updates to the relevant parties, and I believe that Senator McConney has indicated that this will be done, but I think we need to do it in a way where it's done in an accessible format. And I do recall, sir, I don't want to age myself here, but we need to almost have a 2021 Giggle and Boo, which gets the message across to persons who may not necessarily be as up to date with the fancy messages which you may receive via your phone and social media. The point is, sir, that in these times, with the disinformation, with the misinformation, with the vaccine rollout, with what we have seen in terms of the rise of conspiracy theories. Sir, I will refer to my group chat again. I've done it in this house once before. I'll do it again. Sir, I have some very close friends, all of whom I can say, sir, are educated beyond 2 or 3 schools, sir. And even within that chat, sir, occasionally a message will find its way which causes me disappointment. And these are educated Barbadian sons of the soil, sir. So what happens when these messages find themselves in other places without someone to say, this is nonsense, why are you posting this? It is clear that there's misinformation. It is clear that there's disinformation. If we're doing a new ID card, we're doing an ID card with a chip, we're doing an ID card with biodata, we're doing an ID card where a vaccine is being rolled out. At the same time, there are going to be questions from the public, and I wish the government the best when they roll it out, because it's not how you start, it's how you finish, to counter the message that will be out there by persons who do not necessarily have the Barbadians' public interest at heart. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. Senator Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am not a lawyer, so I can be brief. Mr. President, it is timely that the Barbados National Identity Management Bill has come to this House directly following the debate and the passage of another bill this morning. And some time ago, there was an extensive public Joint Select Committee report on the Data Protection Bill in 2019. And this bill and its success hinges on the enforcement, Mr. President, of some of the commitment made in that bill. When we issue an ID card that has a person's personal biometric data, we are responsible for making sure that it's not given out to persons or agencies that are not authorized to have it. And in Section 8, I think, of the Data Protection Bill, it speaks to enforcement. Recently, we had in this country a breach of a bill only passed last year. I'm told, because I've not seen it, that on WhatsApp there appeared list of persons' names with their IDs who were allegedly COVID positive. And Mr. President, if you're going to set the rules by which you must live in the country, you have to enforce the penalties. So while we're in here debating the future in terms of our ID card, we've had recent breaches, really serious breaches in the Data Protection Act and leaking persons' private information. And no one so far has been hauled before the courts for it. So it worries me that we will set the rules, lay them out very clearly, but we may not be enforcing them. Mr. President, one section of this bill concerns me, and it concerns me because I have seen the discrimination against, meted out to some of our brethren from CARICOM and other places with regard to the requirement to use an ID card to access services. And in this bill, Clause 5, Section 10F, specifically says that a person who is not registered under this Act shall not qualify to access any service or goods which require the presentation of an identification card to obtain such services or goods. And I see discrimination from the point of view of medical care, Mr. President, when persons are at their weakest, where persons are kept waiting extraordinarily long and sometimes are denied service because of the requirement to have an ID card. And I hope that, as Senator Boyce said, when we do pass this bill, that we will provide a useful alternative for persons who do not have a card, so they will not suffer morbidity or mortality when they will not be denied timely access to medical services, Mr. President. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Mr. Maynard. Senator McCartney. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I wish to thank my colleagues for the debate that ensued just now. Senator Greenidge really welcomed the replacement of the card with another one, and he spoke about the fact that he thought that the penalties that were there were sufficient and that it was an important signal for us to send, that people could not seek to get around the system and make mischief without being subject to some kind of penalty. Senator Boyce, I want to say I thank you for raising the situation of being mindful that there's misinformation and disinformation of mischief makers, people who are willfully out there seeking to make mischief. I know that there is not much we can do with regards to people who are free to say and do whatever they like. Freedom of speech has its own set of limitations as to what we can do. However, what we will seek to do is, to the extent possible, make sure that we provide official sources of information and encourage the public to say, if you don't see it from these sources, it may or may not be true. But at the same time, make sure that we are responding in a timely way to those issues that we recognize can gather legs and truly create far more havoc. One of the questions that you asked, you spoke about, was the whole idea of biometric data being required. Please note, the only piece of biometric data that is required is a photograph, which is the same thing that's on your current ID. We are requiring no additional biometric data than what already exists as part of your ID. What we have said is, for those who wanted to ask for it and choose to, it is by choice and consent that you then may provide your fingerprints, and at that point in time, you choose whether you provide one, all 10, but there is no obligation. It is entirely optional. You give consent, and you make that choice if you so choose. And then we have put certain things in place to ensure that that fingerprint cannot be exploited in a way that will go against the laws of this country. You also spoke about raising the difference between the national list. Right now, no Barbadian can go to the electoral department and say, give me all the information on everybody who has a national registration number. You can't go and do that and then get that information. Likewise, you cannot get access to the full national register. However, just as it is now, there is an electoral list that will be produced, and that electoral list is available for scrutiny under certain conditions as set out by the electoral department. So understand, there are some people who have said they're concerned that the national register is not going to be at the open to the public. Currently, the entire database of people who live in Barbados and have a national registration number is now available to the public. And so we are not adding any additional burden on the public or taking away any right from the public at this point in time. The situation remains the same with regards to the two different lists. Understand that the National Register will have information that's really private information. And therefore, it remains outside of the public purview, but the electoral list would be sanitized with the kind of information that is currently allowed to be out there and does not in any way come in breach of any of the laws of this country. I really thank you for the suggestion to tie the data protection education to that of the education that will be rolled out on the identity management system. We will certainly take that under advisement and ensure that the two, as you know, they're both running out. We were waiting for the Data Protection Commissioner and that entire structure to be set up before we started rolling that out, so that Barbadians will have a recourse and a place where they can ask questions, and they would have the Data Protection Commissioner in place, etc. As soon as that is in place, we will continue. Doesn't say that we cannot continue to educate about the Data Protection Act at that point. We certainly, right now, we certainly can, but we have to make sure that we are doing that in a way that is consistent with good sense. One of the things that people have mentioned is the fact that there are certain people who, what is it you can do with the card? The bottom line is we are not seeking to disenfranchise anyone at this point. The same thing you can do now with a regular ID card, you can do with the new smart card. The additional services are there to make your life easier. And you can choose to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as we roll those services out. And I repeat, not all services are going to be available from jump. We will roll them out in phases when we have the right kind of infrastructure and services, so that you're getting added value as time goes on. And certainly, I hear Dr. Maynard, Senator Dr. Maynard's concern about the room for discrimination if people do not have an ID. And this is certainly something that we will have to raise in the appropriate level and make sure that it doesn't. Right now, there are some ways in which people are still able to access those services. But as you say, make it easier in this way for them to be able to do that. The concern also raised by Dr. Maynard is that of making sure that we not only make the rules, but that we enforce them. And certainly in this regard, Barbados has a lot to lose if we do not enforce certain things as part of this law, not just as it relates to our law, but as relates to the relationship with our international partners who require as well as certain standards. So we are bound by law, and we're also bound by certain relationships that make sure that we have to be vigilant, and that we have to make sure we deal with the audits in the way we should, and that we are being able to respond and perform at the standards to which we have signed on under the business agreements that we have out there. And so it is with gratitude for the kind of input and suggestions and the really hearty debate that I thank you all for your contribution, and I beg to move that this bill be now read, again be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator McCondy. The question is that this bill be now read a second time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair, and this chamber should resolve itself into committee for the further consideration of the bill.
The question is that I shall now leave the chair and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Senate is now in committee. Sure.
Part 1, clauses 1 through 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1, 2, 3 stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 through 3 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 4 through 9.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 4 through 9 stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 4 to 9 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 10 through 15.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 10 through 15, stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 10 through 15 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 16 through 18.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 16 through 18, stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 16 through 18 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 19 through 21.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 19 through 21, stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 19 through 21 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 22 and 23.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 6, clauses 22 and 23, stand part.
The question is that Part 6, clauses 22 and 23 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 24 through 28.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 24 through 28, stand part.
The question is that Part 7, clauses 24 through 28 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 29 through 33. Through 34.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 8, clauses 29 through 34, stand part.
The question is that Part 8, clauses 29 through 34 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The first schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The second schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
The question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The fourth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The fifth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The sixth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Barbados Identity Management Act 2021.
The question is that this bill do now pass and be so cited. Those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The bill is now so passed and be cited. So passed and so cited.
Mr. President, we'd like to revert to introduction of bills.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I wish to give notice of a resolution to allow the Standing Orders Committee to consider amendments to the standing orders to facilitate the virtual sit-in of the Senate.
Mr. President, revert to public business.
Public business.
Order number 7. Order number 7, in the name of the Honourable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to allow the Standing Orders Committee to consider amendments to the Standing Orders to facilitate the virtual sitting of the Senate.
Whereas by proclamation dated the 26th of October 2020, Parliament was empowered to meet from the 27th day of October 2020, with some members present in the chambers and others participating virtually for the purpose of complying with the protocols relating to physical distancing. And whereas it is desirable that the Senate should meet in that hybrid format, thereby necessitating an amendment to the standing orders. And whereas, in accordance with Standing Order 60, this matter should be referred to the Standing Orders Committee for its consideration. Be it resolved that this House empower the Standing Orders Committee to consider the said amendments, dated this 24th day of February 2021. Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
The question is that this resolution do not pass. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Resolution is now so passed. The matter, in accordance with our standing orders, will be passed to the Standing Orders Committee. And members are aware, I'm sure, of the membership of that committee. It's in the order paper. So please, those members expect to be contacted in short order to go through the details. And the Standing Orders Committee, in accordance with the standard orders, must submit a report for the approval of the Senate in order for the standing orders to be changed. So the current membership of that committee, the President is Chair, Senator Dr. Holder, Senator Damien Sands, Senator Boyce, and Senator Franklin. So we shall deliberate on that matter in short order and be able to revert to, and hope to revert to the Senate at its next meeting. Senator Boyce?
Mr. President, I just want to commend the government on reacting so swiftly to the suggestion made earlier today, sir.
I thank you, Senator Boyce. We had reacted before you came, before you said it. Well, we were happy to repeat our reaction. Thank you very much for adding some humor to our proceedings.
Mr. President, the business of the government has now been concluded, and I now beg to move that we adjourn this sit-in, sine die.
The question is that the business of the day being concluded, the Honourable Senate be adjourned sine die. Those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those honourable senators against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This Senate is accordingly so adjourned.